Welcome to Hallowed Ground Storycast. I'm Alan.
And I'm Anya.
And I'm Poetry. And this episode is about the book series that inspired me to write a 600,000-word fanfiction series, the Animorphs series by Katherine Applegate and Michael Grant. And we'll particularly be focusing on book number 19, The Departure.
How can I go around doing the things I do and still believe that life is sacred? That every life is sacred? Sometimes I'm a predator, sometimes I'm prey. So today we're thrilled to introduce this episode's guest, Poetry. Poetry is a known Animorphs person on the internet. They are best known for their Demorphine series, of which is an Animorphs His Dark Materials fusion that is 600,000 words and counting. So still, I guess, technically a work in progress.
Yep. I was just working on it yesterday, in fact.
Nice. So why don't you summarize the Animorphs series in general, and then give us a plot summary for book 19.
Overall, it's about a vast interplanetary war between these two species, the Andalites, who are these blue scorpion centaur aliens, and the Yeerks, who are these aliens who are parasitic slugs that can infest the brains of other species. The main characters are the titular Animorphs. They're 5 human kids who were given this morphing technology that lets them turn into animals by the dying Andalite warrior Elfangor, plus Elfangor's little brother Aximili, who is the 6th Animorph. Together, the Animorphs use their ability to morph into animals to conduct this secret guerrilla war against the Yeerk Empire that wants to enslave humanity and take our brains. In book 19, The Departure, the story gets a lot more complicated than what I just presented to you. One of the Animorphs, Cassie, becomes tired of the violence and trauma of this war that she's secretly fighting after school, along with the other human kids, and she leaves the Animorphs. She gets stranded in the woods through a series of weird accidents with Aftran 942, who is a Yeerk, one of these parasitic slugs, who is infesting a little girl named Karen. Lost and alone together in the woods, Cassie and Aftran grow to understand each other, and Cassie realizes that Yeerks are people, and they're not just evil brain slugs. In the end, Cassie convinces Aftran to give up her host, Karen, and let her go free. Cassie rejoins the Animorphs in the war, powered on by this hope that one day humans can make peace with the Yeerks and coexist without slavery and violence.
Damn, that's pretty heavy for a kids' book series.
Yeah, sure is. The main series of Animorphs is 54 books long. If you include all of the side stories, it's 62 books. The books in the main series rotate narration among the 6 Animorphs, while the side stories break out of this pattern. They often focus on particular aliens in the series. Animorphs was actually written by a husband and wife team, Katherine Applegate and Michael Grant, and in a reversal of hundreds of years of literary history, only the wife got the credit, which amuses me a lot. The duo got an abysmally bad writing contract from Scholastic. They were contractually obligated to write a book a month for 4 years, even while they had a newborn baby. These impossible conditions meant they needed to have some of the later books ghostwritten, based on their outlines. Scholastic also got full creative control over any adaptations of the books. So basically, the Animorphs TV show that was made had no involvement whatsoever from Applegate and Grant. Animorphs was popular enough that Apple Grant, that's what I often call them for short, what the fandom calls them for short, Apple Grant should have made bank, but their bad contract meant they did not, unfortunately.
That really sucks, the fact that J.K. Rowling ended up being the first female billionaire or something, and Apple Grant basically got nothing. That just seems horrible. And they had to do it all on no sleep with a newborn baby.
They got the opposite of what they deserved. J.K. Rowling deserved to have to churn out a book a month, and Apple Grant deserved to be billionaires, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of children's fiction traditionally didn't even have a real author. It was a invented persona.
I see. Yeah. Babysitter's Club, all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And they weren't a real author. It was a team of 6 people who were on a rotation ghostwriting stuff to churn out every month. And they didn't get any residuals. They just had a contract that basically said, we will consider you in the future for your own project, which I think actually is how Apple Grant like got into this position in the first
I believe
place.
Katherine Applegate was a writer for Boxcar Children. I believe.
Right, exactly.
Oh wow, that's so interesting. I had no idea. I was super into Boxcar Children when I was like very, very young.
This way of writing is like really like comic books. That's like
I was actually about to say the same thing. It's like Marvel owns Spider-Man, and then but at least the people who, you know, write an issue or a run of comic books get their name on it, you know?
Yeah, I think Scholastic's pretty much running the same way. They like hold the schools hostage for money and then pay their writers nothing if they can afford to. So, yeah, this is what most writers get terrible contracts like this with promises of like, in the future, you know, if these are successful, we'll get a better deal for you. And it's like, it never happens.
I mean, to be fair, Applegate and Grant have had very successful careers post Animorphs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, they should have gotten the full, like, good contract at the time for Animorphs, but Katherine Applegate has really made a name for herself in children's literature, like not middle grade like Animorphs, but like, you know, younger children's books since Animorphs, and Michael Grant has written several popular young adult books, some of which I greatly enjoy.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that makes me feel less bad about it. I'm happy for them. Yeah, so Poetry, tell us a little bit about your first experience with Animorphs.
So I had the classic first experience with Animorphs, which was that my school had a Scholastic book fair. For those who are not familiar, in the United States in the 1990s, it was very common to have these Scholastic book fairs, which was when Scholastic would come around to elementary schools and set up in the gymnasium or something all of these different shelves with books aimed at, you know, the appropriate age groups. And then you'd go around with your allowance from your parents or whatever and buy books. So I went to a Scholastic book fair when I was 7 years old, and I saw on one of the shelves the book 17, The Underground, which has one of those classic Animorphs psychedelic covers, which many people on the internet know and love. It was of Rachel, this blonde girl turning into a bat, and I just thought, wow, I need to read a book about a girl who turns into a bat. So I got that book, and from then I was completely hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I saved up my allowance and just spent it every month getting the next Animorphs book.
That's awesome. You know, I think I may have gotten my first exposure to Animorphs also at a Scholastic book fair. I guess I was reading a lot of different things, and so I didn't quite get hooked the way you did. I really enjoyed the first few, but then I think I kind of lost interest in the mid-single digits. I guess maybe like war stories wasn't like really my thing at that time. I remembered so little about the books that I almost don't even feel like that counts as my first experience with Animorphs. I remembered basically book 1, and that was about it. And so revisiting them for this podcast episode was super fun. And I was really surprised by how well they hold up. Like, to me, they didn't really feel like kids' books in like the way that I guess I was kind of expecting them to just be like a little bit shallow or feel, you know, kind of like Power Rangers, where it's just like there's a gimmick and it repeats every book, you know. I guess the parts of it that feel kind of like, you know, kids lit are the ages of the protagonist, the length of the book, they're pretty short, and the romantic relationship is very like middle school, low key, where they basically just hold hands and kind of like each other. But you know, like try to keep it a secret. But the characters themselves they're really complicated, they're really well drawn, they change over time. And honestly, they feel much more high school than middle school to me. The fact that the stories were so short didn't bother me at all. The serialized nature of the story, it just made it feel kind of like an episodic TV show or like a series of short stories rather than novels.
You want the kid to finish it and feel like, wow, I read a book. And it's like, but it wasn't too much, especially if you're talking about, this would be like called science fantasy or, you know, some weird subgenre like that, where usually there's like so much scaffolding and world building. I think that Applegate does a fantastic job of like laying down the rules of this world, and then just really focusing on the interiority of the characters, like you said, and keeping that like very real. I think that's why this spoke to so many kids. You know.
So what was your first experience with this, Alan? Was this your first time, or had you encountered Animorphs before?
I think that I was vaguely aware of the Animorphs TV show, which I assumed was PBS ripping off Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I was like, that's funny.
I like that we both have made Power Rangers references at this point in the show.
I would be willing to bet that the Morphin part of the title might be related.
That's like how, that's where our brain is like subconsciously making that connection.
Well, and also to me, like Animorphs feels like a deconstruction of Power Rangers, because the whole premise of Power Rangers is like, these kids are like fighting a war after school against aliens, how fun. And Animorphs is saying, actually, if kids actually fought a war against aliens after school, it would destroy them psychologically.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought when I read it, too, because the premise is almost exactly the same. I can just imagine, you know, somebody in Scholastic being like, what's hot with kids right now? Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you know, morphin, let's morph something. What can we morph? And it has like this edutainment kind of thing going on of like, here are animal facts in every book, you know?
Except sometimes the animal facts are wrong.
Yeah, which is great. But to answer your question, I didn't read this stuff when this was coming out. I'm pretty sure that I was at the end of high school. I've heard about them for years, though, from people that I admire who are younger than me, but are like very creative and very smart. And they cite these books as a primary influence on their style and meditation on their themes and stuff like that. I only read this one book, but then I listened to a podcast that covered the entire series book by book for about an hour and a half per book. So I know everything that happened, or I think I do, at least what they said happened.
Was this Morph Club? Morph Club's pretty reliable.
Morph Club. Yes, they're great. And a lot of fun to listen to. Very smart. You know, this reminded me of, we were getting ready for it, is kind of like moonlighting, when we talked to Lonnie about that, and how moonlighting was this thing where like all the producers were like, shit, we have to put something in this time slot. Let's put this loser on here with these nobodies. And like, you know, if it flops, it's a tax write-off. If anybody watches it, it's a win. Who cares? And this is like a Scholastic writing contract. We'll milk these people for 4 years, a book a month. If they can't do it, great for us because they defaulted on the contract. We don't have to pay them. And if anybody reads it, that's also good for us. Win-win, right? So you get this terrible contract. And it's kind of like nobody's watching, you know, like the contract is like set up in a way to be this like double jeopardy situation for the creator. And so they just go all in and they're just like write their ass off and do their thing. And then people are like, have you seen this thing? Like, it's crazy. And I think that's kind of what Animorphs is. You know, it's like you said, it's like way more serious than you think it should be. And it's like deconstructing the genre that it is in a way that's like way more sophisticated than you would ever guess. And I think that speaks to like, kids are not dumb, you know, like it spoke to a lot of people, obviously.
Like if you look at it objectively, it looks like one of those like carefully constructed diversity things, right? Like it's a mix of boys and girls, and there's, you know, like it's racially diverse. And it's kind of, you know, and because the narrators take turns, or the characters take turns narrating different books, it's like you can kind of, you know, have your favorite one who you identify with the most. And
like Captain Planet or something.
Yeah. But it feels a lot more genuine than that, you know, like in the way that it's enacted. It doesn't feel like a cynical, empty ploy at like, it doesn't feel like superficial diversity, you know?
Like Captain Planet, yeah.
And especially at a time where, well, I didn't have Cartoon Network, so I don't know. It just seems like at a time when so much of kids lit is really segregated, like boys lit with boy characters for boys to read and girls lit with girl characters for girls to read. This is like a very genuine and compelling mix, and like it showed like, oh yes, boys and girls can be friends together.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, you're right about that. I hadn't thought of that way, but yeah, this isn't like the Babysitters Club, right? Versus
the Hardy Boys.
Right.
I mean, I'm here because I love this series. I don't want to give Applegate more credit than they deserve on the racial diversity. It is kind of classic 90s tokenism. I mean, I'm Latina myself, and Marco is... I was reading books in Spanish as well growing up, so obviously I was, reading about Latina protagonists, but Marco was the first character in an English language book I had read who was also Latina, and that meant something to me, but also, like, it was very superficial, right? So, it's like, I mean, like, there's a couple of mentions of it, like in book 11, he speaks a little bit of Spanish, in book 21, he mentions his mother passing her citizenship exam, that sort of thing, but it's very rare that it's really brought up at all. Rachel and Jake, two of the characters, are Jewish, but it's only brought up in the one book where they time travel back to World War II, which makes me cringe because Judaism is pretty much always brought up solely in the context of the Holocaust. And Animorphs says exactly that, and it's just like, oh, cringe. I'm also Jewish, to be clear. And Cassie's blackness, I mean, it's not like it's never mentioned, but it's not really delved into particularly much. Again, it's mostly brought up in the time travel book, which, again, is pretty cringe in a particular way. So I don't want to give them too much credit. At the same time, I mean, Cassie, to me, feels like an incredibly subversive black protagonist, right? Like, I mean, I'm not black, so I don't want to step out of my lane, but when I hear my black friends of my age talk about how they had no books growing up that had, black heroes who were complex, I just want to be like, but didn't you read Animorphs? Because Cassie is this, like, amazing... I mean, Cassie is this really, really complex and wonderful black protagonist. She's the protagonist of book 19, which we all read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right. Maybe I am giving them a little bit too much credit. I guess the gender mixing felt more like I was really impressed with that. That didn't feel like tokenism at all. Like, it felt like they were genuinely friends and, like, working together in a way that you don't see a lot in kids lit.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, especially around this time, like, it's, books that were aimed at kids, it's not like they were trying to reinforce that whole cultural thing, but trying to, like, stay within the lanes of the capitalism rules of it, right? To be like, we want to sell to this female audience, so these Babysitter Club books are pink with girls in pink sweaters on the cover, and they have white girl names and white girls, and they're for girls, see?
And they're
so
taking care of children.
Of babies.
They're, like, engaging in their maternal instincts.
Right. All that stuff. So I don't think Animorphs is doing that, but I think part of it, part of it is probably that whole, deconstructing the genre thing, but I think it's also because nobody was looking at this thing the way that they were those Babysitter Club books, in the publishing arm of it. I don't think they were just like, yeah, whatever.
I'm talking about breaking the capitalist rules. I mean, like, these books are outright anti-imperialist. Like, they're very clearly so, and anti-U.S. imperialism in particular. So to me, the Andalites, these sort of blue scorpion centaur aliens in these books, are very much a metaphor for U.S. imperialism. In the beginning of the series, the Andalites are presented as the heroes. The Animorphs meet this dying Andalite warrior who gives them the power to morph, and, he gives them this whole speech about how, the Yeerks are taking over your planet, and the Andalites are only people who are gonna fight them. And then over the course of the series, you learn that the Andalites are dicks, and they're horrible. Like you learn in the Hork-Bajir Chronicles that the Andalites committed genocide against one of the species they were supposedly trying to save from the Yeerks. So they decided, we can't save this species, so we're just going to kill them all so the Yeerks can't take them. So
right.
They did that, and so these supposed heroes are just genocidal. And then to me, what's also really subversive is throughout the series, these kids are waiting for the Andalites to come save them. They're like, we're just holding off the Yeerks until the Andalites can come and they'll rescue us. I mean, in a way, this is a very Vietnam War kind of situation where the Animorphs are kind of in the position of guerrilla fighters like the Viet Cong, and then the Andalites come at the end of the series, and they've come to genocide humanity so that the Yeerks don't take them. So They're not the heroes. They are not the cavalry. They've come to make things even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very subversive message where it's like the people who you think are the heroes, they're actually genocidal imperialists, and they're not heroes, and an invading army is not actually going to come and save the day. Like, an invading army is always a bad thing, even if you think they're the heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it troubles the idea of a moral war or something like that. These kids are in a position where they feel like they have to fight for their existence on Earth. And it's but these are the moral good guys, who are out there also fighting the same fight we are. And then and even one of their number is an Andalite. And then, when it comes down to it, like you said, you find out that they are actually going to destroy them too. And so there is no good war in these books, ever.
Yes.
So I was going to talk about this later, but since you already brought up the ending of this series, maybe we should just talk about it now. That ending is or was somewhat controversial in the fandom, and was just wondering if you wanted to talk about that at all, Poetry.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember very keenly when that book came out, and it was emotionally devastating to me. So one of the 6 Animorphs, Rachel, dies in the end in the war, and the Animorphs who survive, their outcomes are very mixed. It's not a triumphant, we're the heroes and we're famous now and blah, blah, blah. It's very complicated. Jake, the leader of the Animorphs, gets severe PTSD and depression after the war, and you just see him suffering horrifically and making really bad choices. And Marco, another one of the Animorphs, he's always wanted to become famous, and he does, which is typically presented as a triumphant ending in a children's book, but it's actually shown to be very empty and hollow, and he's not very happy with this outcome of becoming this, Hollywood famous star. Tobias becomes a hermit, basically just completely retreats from society and doesn't interact with anybody, so he's also just very mentally ill. Axe seems to be okay, and Cassie is, basically takes up a new fight. I mean, she becomes a politician and starts fighting for the rights of aliens on Earth. It's like the fight is never over for any of them, really, because Axe also goes on to fight more wars, and none of them actually get to have that, close the book and just retire to Hobbiton or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very upsetting. I cried a lot, and it was super hard to read, and yet at the same time, I felt very respected as a reader. I felt like I was being taken seriously, even though it was really difficult for me to read. I was used to books I read being tied up very neatly, and I felt the fact that it was messy, I felt the respect. And in fact, Katherine Applegate wrote a letter to fans after the last book came out because she saw how many kids were really upset by the ending. And she basically wrote a letter to her readers saying, hey, I'm sorry that this ending was really sad, but I want you to know that this is what real wars are like. And if you found this ending upsetting, then when you turn 18, vote and make sure that a war like this never happens. If you don't like that this happened to the Animorphs, make sure it doesn't happen to anyone you know. Which is just such a powerful thing to tell kids. If you don't like this ending, you change it.
Yeah, it's she didn't back down from her convictions, and she's telling people, empowering them to try to make a difference.
The very final moments were like very surprising to me that they talked about, and I don't know if we want to spoil them, but and like I said, I didn't read the book. I listened to the Morph Club podcast about it, but it's like clear to me in that ending, she's like really pushing that allegory of like the war will never let go of you. Like it doesn't matter what happens after. You carry the trauma with you forever. War is trauma that unrolls on history and never stops hurting people until you, like, as a society, you face it. And that's like what these books are at their core, in terms of like the relationships of the kids are extremely important to each other, but they're all situated in this war. And it's the thing that is tearing them apart. Like, it's not what gives them definition or like a purpose or any of that. It's the thing that is destroying them, even though they don't totally understand that. And I think Cassie wakes up to that the most by the end.
Yeah.
But I think it does, like, it consumes Rachel, it destroys Jake, it destroys Tobias. Like, it's awful. Which like that sucks for people who think they're getting into something for entertainment purposes. But I love, like, that's what writing is. I think that's a lot of integrity that she has, like you said, Anya, to not flinch from that ending and to really stick it.
Yeah, I mean, she perpetually confronts, like, the typical black and white morality of children's literature, not just in this way of, like, challenging, whether there can be moral war, but also just, like, in terms of, who is a hero, who is an enemy. In book 19 in particular, there's this line that Aftran, the Yeerk, says, which is, she says to Cassie, "Your morality is very simple. Anything humans do is okay. Anything Yeerks do is wrong." And that's essentially the morality of a lot of children's literature. It's just whatever the heroes do is justified, and whatever the enemies do is wrong. But I mean, this series constantly challenges that. It's constantly saying, the heroes can do monstrous things. The quote unquote heroes can do monstrous things, and sometimes the Yeerks are people, as demonstrated in book 19, and they make moral choices. I mean, in book 19, you learn that the Yeerks have a peace movement, which is like, it completely changes the course of the series, because it's, up until now, the Yeerks have just been these verminous slugs who take over people's brains, which is just a classic sci-fi villain. But it's like, what if some of these slugs had a peace movement saying, like, hey, we don't agree with doing this. We don't think we should take hosts against their will. That's wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's constantly challenging you on your assumptions and, how you categorize people as wrong or right. It's unrelenting in that.
Yeah, and I think the series really kind of puts that in the context of, like, the greater animal kingdom, right? Because it's like the morality of predation and parasitism in general. Like, it's an interesting question how much we can project our human values on other species, and like, what is it about the Yeerks that makes the way they're conducting themselves, immoral by human standards? Because, I mean, it is a compelling argument. She's like, sorry, we're parasites. This is what we do. Like, would you get mad at a lion for killing a gazelle? Where do you kind of draw the line? She brings up the fact that humans keep, livestock in horrible conditions and then kill them to eat them. And so how is what are the Yeerks are doing any different than that?
Well, and the really wild thing when you step back and think about it is that, the entire premise of these books is the kids have this morphing technology that allows them to like interact with the DNA of another animal, and then after that they can morph into that animal at will for up to 2 hours, and then they have to take a rest back in their human body. That is technology that would fix the Yeerk problem of like wanting to be in bodies that can do things that their bodies can't, and nullify like the agency problem. They don't need the hosts like
Right.
necessarily to exist, right? Like they, even when they're with the hosts, they actually have to like come out or they'll die and like rest in a natural kind of environment for them. The Andalites have the solution to their problem,
Yes.
but they are so warlike that they will not share it with people.
I can't believe that didn't even occur to me, but you're absolutely right. That, like, with the Yeerks, their whole motivation, right, for taking over hosts is not because they need them to reproduce or, you know, it's not, like, necessary for their life cycle or for their survival. It's just that the Yeerks don't have vision. They have, like, a more primitive sensory system. And they just, they like being able to see things and experience things and like be more mobile and, you know, not just be swimming around in a pool.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Andalite imperialism effects go even deeper than that. So this is an argument I've made in this fandom for a long time. Think about it. So in Book 19, Aftran, justifies the Yeerk's desire for hosts, saying, well, like, I want to experience the world the way you do. She says to Cassie, like, you get to move through this beautiful world, you get to see and experience everything around you. Like, why can't I have the same thing? But if you think about it, I mean, in their natural state, Yeerks are slugs living in pools, and they have their own set of senses. In other books, they talk about how the Yeerks have sonar. They can kind of, echolocate inside of their pools. They have like an osmosis nodes that let them, interact with and absorb things from the water that they live in. So, I mean, if you think about it, they actually do have a sensorium, and they are mobile. They can swim around their pools. So the question is, why do they feel that their own sensory apparatus is inferior and bad, and their own form of mobility is inferior and bad? And then you start to think, is it because the Andalites came and occupied their planet? Never asking, because the Andalites never asked, they just showed up on their planet with a military, came to their pools, and then they imposed, perhaps, that they had their own technology that required Andalite sensory modalities and Andalite forms of mobility to interact with, which the Yeerks couldn't do because they didn't have the right, it wasn't underwater or, Yeerk-compatible technology. So, of course they would think that their own sensory experience and their own mobility was inferior because the Andalites come, they've got this amazing technology, and it's not compatible with them. Instead of doing the sort of social model of disability thing and saying, this technology should be suitable for us, and it's the Andalites' problem, it's the Yeerks internalize this worldview, saying, well, this is our problem, we have the wrong bodies. We can't interact with this technology, we can't interact with these people, so we need to have host bodies that can. I'm kind of questioning, essentially, the inherent ableism of Aftran's assertion that she needs a host because she needs to be able to see and move around.
Which is like a narrative that you see unfold all over the place in hatred towards America and the West, right? Of we show up with higher technologies than other people who are, we're actively exploiting in the global South, and then they get their hands on some of that technology and start to resist the West. And we're like, whoa, who do you think you are? And now you're you're our biggest enemy. And it's well, think about how all that came about, where did that come from? Yeah, that's a really good observation.
Yeah, I really love that read on it.
I have spent just 20 years thinking about it.
That's true. Yeah, and I basically read 10 books in 1 week. And so
I did think when I was reading it that when Aftran's talking about that stuff, and it's all very ableist, and I didn't feel like it was unconsciously ableist about talking about, well, I want to be able to see and I want to be able to hear the way that you can, or I want to fly like a bird. I didn't feel like that stuff was Applegate accidentally doing that stuff the way that you might in some other writing cases. But the way that I read it was that there was that they were kind of imperialist, the Yeerks, in their culture and in their approach to the humans and to Earth. And that was representing the way that imperialism kind of makes an assumption about our time, and how we should be productive all the time, and all of your physical capabilities and mental capabilities should be oriented towards work, not towards like your enrichment or like cultural enrichment or the enrichment, God forbid, of like people outside of your borders or your cultural sphere. That's a waste of resources for the empire, right? Capitalism owns your body. It owns abled bodies, is the bodies that it's really interested in, and those and the most ably minded. As soon as your mental acuity begins to erode, we're going to trade you in for a newer, smarter model. And the same for your body, and especially when it comes to the military, that's true. And these, in the military is when they're recruiting children, honestly, at like 16, 17 years old. They're in the schools telling them, especially kids like Marco, with single parent homes, not a lot of money. Cassie's family is really struggling for money in this book, telling them, hey, you want to go to college for free? You want to join that professional class? You want to level up your family experience? All you got to do is give us your body, give us your mind. And you too can get into the economy. Just give us everything. And that's what Aftran's saying, like your bodies are for us.
Yeah, and that does kind of bring up another type of diversity that I didn't talk about before, but there's all different kinds of family structures represented.
Yeah, definitely.
There's like quote unquote good, like intact families with like functional good parents that, treat their children well and with respect.
Cassie's family. Yep.
Cassie and Jake.
Yeah, Cassie and Jake have like good families. Tobias has the shittiest family. Like neither of his parents wanted him. They basically like abandon him to relatives who also like don't give a shit about him. Rachel's parents, they treat their kids well, but they're divorced and there's like drama about that.
Marco's mom is
dead.
Well,
at the start of the story, he thinks his mom is dead or she's disappeared. And his dad has basically, like, his dad isn't a bad person, but, the loss of his wife has just, like, really affected his ability to be a functional human being. And so Marco has had to kind of, like, grow up really fast in a lot of ways and kind of, like, parent his dad because his dad isn't doing a good job of parenting him. So it's this, like, really broad and complex spectrum of different types of family systems and interactions that I thought was really, really well done.
Well, and Axe, don't forget Axe. Axe does have parents as well, but he's basically stranded across the galaxy from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's been raised to be in this military role, and then like all of his experiences on Earth are like troubling his entire orientation to all of that stuff, and he like really gloms on to Jake to like reproduce the hierarchy of his society.
Yeah, he calls him like Prince Jake, and Jake's like,
Jake.
I'm not a prince, and Axe is just like, I don't care, you're a prince to me.
Listen, I need this, okay? I'm an orphan on this planet.
Oh, poor Axe. It's awful.
Poor Axe. He's my favorite.
Who doesn't love Axe? He's like an alien on Earth. It's such a classic thing. Like, it's really funny because so the six Animorphs alternate in narration. So you alternate between the six Animorphs, but Axe and Tobias switch off. So the order goes Jake, Rachel, then Tobias or Axe, then Cassie, then Marco. So Axe and Tobias get half as many point of view books as the others. Apparently this is because Scholastic thought they'd be less relatable to kids, and like practically everybody I know, their favorite was either Axe or Tobias.
Right.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the Axe camp.
My favorite as a kid was Rachel, but...
Yeah, I think I remember also identifying the most with Rachel as a kid. Although in retrospect, I feel like maybe I should have identified more with Cassie, just because she's so competent and she's so science-oriented. I guess Rachel's more bossy and extroverted. And so I think that's where I was coming from, because Cassie is pretty introverted and thoughtful. You know, she's the kind of person who, like, she's maybe the quietest person in the room, but when she does have something to say, like, everyone listens to her because it's just like, you know, fucking knocks everyone's off their feet, which is absolutely not me.
I loved her in this book because of her whole thing is radical empathy. And that is, like, so often that is not a heroic character trait in these kind of, like, action adventure genres. You know, this is very subversive to center the story on a character like this, and then to make, I mean, essentially in this book, she, like, loses in a certain sense.
Yeah.
But by losing wins. And, like, that is so rare, I think. That is very literary and very, like, empathetically focused. And that is not, an action adventure is not like, we will win with empathy. Like, that never happens, man.
And this isn't the only book where she does this. Like, in, I mean, famously in, at least in the Animorphs fandom, famously in book 51, she purposefully allows the Yeerks to get a hold of the morphing power for the very reason that you pointed out, Alan, which is that she sees the radical possibility of what would happen if the Yeerks got access to the morphing technology and saw an alternative to their lifestyle of taking over hosts. And the other Animorphs are so angry at her because she's basically given them this enormous military advantage, but she empathizes with the Yeerks, and she's able to see things from their point of view, that this would change their minds and allow them to see things from another perspective.
And it's funny too, because I feel like Applegate doesn't just, like, make this situation happen and then leave it here, because the arc that comes right after this really troubles this entire see it from the other side type thing, where you get, like, the bad Animorph character joins the team and, like, messes everything up really badly. Yeah.
The David trilogy is so good. It's so good. The next 3 books after 19 are just they're just absolutely incredible books.
Yeah. I think that's so smart to put those right after this one, because this feels like an answer in some sense, and then to, like, trouble that answer and be like, war is not that simple. And and there are people in the world who feast on that type of environment and thrive.
I mean, also, Cassie's radical empathy has a super dark side in the David trilogy, right? I mean, so again, just to explain to people who don't know, so in the next 3 books after 19, it's a trilogy about this guy named David who joins the Animorphs, and he is kind of a bad apple. He is not a good choice to be an Animorph. He just, like, basically just becomes a serial killer.
Oh God.
Which is really bad, obviously. And the Animorphs have to stop him, But Cassie, like, her empathy has a really dark side in that trilogy, because she is able to use her empathy for David to emotionally manipulate him. And basically, like, she comes up with the plan that allows them to stop David. I mean, she's the one who is able to see things from his perspective in order to destroy him.
Wow. Yeah, and that was when we were initially trying to think about what books we might cover for this podcast. That was the first set of books that you suggested that we actually read, the David trilogy. I think we decided against it because the audiobooks weren't that far yet. The audiobooks were only up to 20.
So for people in our audience, like, typically I will read stuff via audiobook, both because, like, I listen to audiobooks constantly at my job, which doesn't really require a lot of mental attention. It's physical labor. But then also because, like, I have a reading disability, which makes me read at about the speed of the Star Wars crawl at the beginning of the movies. So it takes me a little bit of time to get through reading a book. And so, the Animorphs, actually, we didn't talk about this in the production section, but they are undergoing a republishing, which I'm sure the Applegates are not being paid for, that is kind of like editing and updating them. And the audiobooks are a part of that whole thing. So I believe they are not audio productions of the original published material, but of this new edited reissue.
That kind of makes me sad because there's so much 90s nostalgia.
Yes.
They talk about, like, oh, this new CD just came out, you know? And there was like, what's the other thing? Oh, landline telephones are like, the kitchen phone rang and blah, blah, blah. I picked it up because it had the longest cord. They spend a lot of time hanging out at the mall. I don't know. That's like not something that's easy to fix. So I don't know if they're going to give them somewhere else to go. But yeah, just like the idea of an indoor mall as like the center of their social life. It was so funny.
Yeah, the republished 3-issue is really doing a very, very superficial, like, updating of the references. But the audiobooks are really great. I recommend them. They're, like, I mean, I really enjoyed the audiobook of 19. I've been listening to all the audiobooks.
We talked about these being kind of like comic books. There's a lot of onomatopoeia that happens in the books. I was really surprised while I was listening to it of like when they don't just say like screeching like a hawk or something like that. Like they do the screeching and the roaring and things like that. That was fun. I enjoyed that.
But are they like putting in actual like clips of roaring or screeching?
It's the narrator. Yeah, it's a
nice.
person going like roar. You know, like, that's why I like it, because it's not like a horse sound. It's like an underpaid VO person who's like, you know, like a sound like a horse. No, do it again. Make a sound like a skunk. Why can't you do it, Steven? It's yeah. I went and got the first one for my youngest daughter because she was always talking about how wouldn't it be easier if you could just be a hamster like my hamster? Wouldn't that be easier than having to go to school and all this? Like she's feeling the pressure of the world. And I was like, here, read these books about these kids who can become animals and see how easy it is.
So how long ago did you do that? Has she gotten into them?
Yeah, she read the first one and then she was like, these kids make a lot of bad choices, Dad. They I don't know if I agree with, like, they shouldn't become insects. That's a bad move. Like, why would you do that?
I mean, okay, so speaking of choices, though, we've talked a little bit about how Applegate asks, like, hard questions about our sense of morality and, like, sci-fi morality. I think they also do a really good job of setting up less philosophical, or that's not the right word, like, less big picture moral questions of like what is morality, but just like putting them into kind of like trolley problem dilemmas where in book 19, Cassie, in order to get the Yerk, Aftron, whatever, out of Karen, the girl, she offers to let Aftran go into her head, but she's not thinking far enough ahead to realize that gives Aftron morphine power, and so Aftron can just like turn in now that the Yerk is in control of Cassie's body. Together, they can turn into, I forget what her bird of prey morph is.
Osprey.
Osprey, yeah. They can morph into the Osprey and then get away. And then the other 5 Animorphs are put in the position of like, we may have to kill our friend in order to save ourselves. So they're like, everyone is in these ethical quandaries, right? Like they know how to kill Yerks via attrition, like keeping them from going back to their nutrient pool. They did that before. But Cassie doesn't feel like she can do that in this situation, and then ends up putting her friends in a situation where they feel like they might have to kill her in order to protect themselves, because if Aftron gets back to the other Yerks, you know, the Yerks don't know who the Animorphs are. They think they're Andalite warriors. They don't even realize that they're humans. And so by giving the rest of the Yerks that information that not only are the rebels humans instead of Andalites, but, you know, their individual identities, the Yerks can just, you know, go kill them and their families, or like anyone that they care about, you know, hold them hostage.
And Marco very nearly does kill Cassie in that book. Like, this is like a kid's book, and like one of them nearly kills the other. And it's great foreshadowing, of course, for the David trilogy, where they don't kill David, they worse than kill David.
Yeah.
We should explain to Anya what happens in the David trilogy. What they end up doing with this murderous Animorph is they trap him in morph as a rat forever, which is supposedly more kid-friendly, but is actually worse than killing him.
Ooh, yeah.
And to be clear, the book does not flinch away from this, that it's worse. The book is very clear that it's worse.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's like a trauma to it that Cassie carries afterwards too.
Because Cassie came up with the plan to trap him in morph as a rat. It was her who came up with it, which is just wild.
I have a question for you that's like a much more practical question. Is it answered in the series? If you get stuck in a morph, do you have like a natural human lifespan, or does your lifespan revert to that of the animal that you're trapped in?
It's the latter. They're clear about it. It's the latter. You have the lifespan of the animal you're trapped in.
I get the impression that Tobias is not actually stuck as a hawk forever, but if he were to stay...
No, he's stuck as a hawk. He is stuck as a hawk forever.
Okay, so he is... I don't know how long hawks live, but like...
This comes up in the last book. Basically, like, I think it's like 15 or something for a hawk.
Yeah, not a human lifespan at all. Okay. Yeah.
It's like after the war, and Tobias is getting kind of old for a hawk, and it's... So like in book 13, Tobias gets the power to morph again, but his base form is a hawk.
I see.
So basically in the last book, the other characters kind of bring up to Tobias like, hey, your hawk form is getting kind of old, like maybe you want to leave that form now and get trapped as a different form so you don't die. And Tobias is basically like, no, I refuse. Because he's very mentally ill.
I guess he can't morph back into himself.
He can, actually.
Okay.
He can be a boy, but then he would stay that way forever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He would just be
and never morph
human.
again. Right.
And he could have done that after the war, but he does not choose to do that, which is very interesting.
So this might be a good time to talk about the idea of Animorphs in general, or Tobias specifically, as like a metaphor for transness.
Tobias in specific, to me, I don't think morphing in general is much of a metaphor for transness, but Tobias in specific is.
I love the way that it's done because I totally see how, trans people would read that into his experience, but also that it's like not a one-to-one analogy. Like there's a lot of ambiguity about whether Tobias prefers to be a hawk or to be a boy, because when he was still a human in the first book, and he felt way more at home as a hawk, but then once he gets trapped as a hawk, he also seems to miss being a human and wish that he could go back kind of at will. So it's really, really interesting.
This isn't obviously my lane, but I think that's why it's kind of successful, because I don't think the trans experience can ever be the cis experience. And then, of course, like all of Western society is calibrated to the cis experience. And so, like Tobias never again feels completely like a boy when he's a boy, and he never feels completely like a bird. And so I think that just the trans experience is its own experience where you never feel like you're fully this or that, if that makes sense.
Or at least that's the non-binary trans experience. I mean, certainly there are binary trans people who feel like fully 100% like they are men or women or... But,
oh yeah, I don't mean that they... like he feels like what he is, but he never... He always carries the experience of being the other with him too, in a way that I think that a cisgender person just cannot understand, of experiencing what the other gender is, or even what the outside of it is like to someone else. That's not an experience that I can ever actually totally understand, I think.
I mean, to me, the moments when it becomes most striking are the moments when, after book 13, when he gets the power to morph back and he can morph his human self again. Like, he very clearly experiences dysphoria when he's morphing his own human self. And the thing is, we have no way of
Right.
knowing if he experienced dysphoria as his human self before he became a hawk, because he becomes trapped as a hawk in the first book, and that book isn't in his point of view. So we don't know if maybe he had dysphoria before that point, but he certainly has dysphoria in his human form after that. Like, they're in a million different ways, it's very obvious. He moves very awkwardly as his human self. He just doesn't seem to fit in social situations. He's not all that comfortable in his human body. And maybe that was always true, or maybe that's something that became true, but that to me is why Tobias feels the most like a trans metaphor, because the other Animorphs have a clear sense of what their natural body is and what their true body is, and Tobias does not have that stable sense of, like, this is what my true body is, which is, I think, a powerful trans metaphor.
Yeah, that's really well put, and that's kind of exactly what I was trying to say. Of like so like, you know, we talk about like natural kinds and things like that, which I don't really believe in very much. But like, if there are natural genders, then I would tend to think that there are only two, and that would not be male and female, but it would be people who feel natural and comfortable in their bodies and people who don't. And so like that seems to be Tobias's experience, and that's kind of what I meant. Is his relationship with his body is not like anybody else's in the story.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and also I might point out, another one of my favorite trans Tobias moments is that in book 43, he actually morphs a human girl. And it's really interesting because, like, the narrative doesn't really stop to dwell on it, but what's super interesting is that when he morphs his own human body, he's clearly very dysphoric, and when he morphs this human girl, Taylor, he does not seem to have that dysphoria. And I'm just like, isn't that interesting?
As I know, I like spent a lot of time earlier kind of like praising the gender dynamics of the books. There are definitely some places where the way that gender is presented does feel super out of date. Like,
Marco.
Yeah, Marco. A lot of the shit that Marco says just like feels super, of that 90s, like, boys and girls being like very distinct and separate and like having this like antagonistic setup. For instance, when they're morphing, or when they're like, I think, was it when they were at the zoo acquiring wolves or something? I don't know. But there was like definite thing of like Marco being like, oh, well, I need to morph the boy wolf. I can't morph a girl wolf because, like, that would be weird. And it's like, you're turning into a fucking wolf. Like, there's...
it's pretty weird. It's already weird.
I don't think, like, being a girl wolf is gonna be the weirdest part about that.
No, it's true. I mean, a lot of Marco's stuff that he says would not fly anymore in a book for this age group. He would have to be shut down much more decisively if he said stuff like that these days.
Yeah. Although there is that funny thing that you pointed out where, like, some of his, like, most sarcastic, like, shitty things can be interpreted a different way. Where, like, you were telling me that how in fandom there's this, a lot of people kind of, like, have this headcanon where Marco is actually bisexual because he says these things to Jake that are supposed to be sarcastic, but if you've ever had that like closeted queer experience of like joking about your attraction to someone, but it's like not really a joke, it totally reads that way if you go into it with that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of stuff where in the books where Marco is kind of teasing Jake, and it's supposed to be a joke. Like, in one book, he writes Jake an email as Cassie, like a love letter, basically. And he, like, pretends to be Cassie and tries to, like, catfish Jake with this love letter email. And it's supposed to be a quote-unquote joke, but I'm just like, it's kind of... like, fellas, is it gay if you pretend to be your your bro's girlfriend and write him a catfish love letter email. No, it's a common headcanon, and I do love that Applegate and Grant on Twitter have said, I mean, they've done the thing that Rowling should have done, which is, like, when people come to them with these headcanons, they say, you know, we didn't put that in, and that wasn't our intention, but we really enjoy that you're reading that into it, and we encourage you to do so. Which is great. I mean, I think it's the right approach. They're not taking credit for representation they didn't do, but they're also encouraging people to bring those interpretations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's it is like the ideal way to bring that death of the author concept, right? Like, you can take what the author had as their intentions in mind, but, you know, what you read into the text is what it means to you.
In book 40, there is a gay Andalite couple, which I love very much. I mean, it's in that 90s way. Like, so have either of you read Young Wizards, Diane Duane?
No.
Oh boy. It's like this 90s, 80s/90s way of doing gay representation, where it's like, they don't say that they're gay, but there's just these two men who live together and, like, are clearly, like, long-term living together, and just, you know, it's just, that's their thing. They have that, but for, like, this gay Andalite couple in book 40. Which, like, the authors definitely intended as canon gay stuff. I love them very much. These gay Andalites, though they're a pretty mixed bag as far as representation goes. Like, they're very sweet and adorable, and I love them with all my heart, but, like, one of them does have space AIDS. He's dying of space AIDS, and it's pretty grim. Like, I'm just like, did you have to give him space AIDS?
Yeah, like, I mean, I guess it was the 90s, but also, like, it's sci-fi. You can do what you want. Like, have a little bit of escapism.
He does do space weed for his space AIDS, which is incredibly valid of him, but...
Oh my god.
But it's not exactly the representation we were necessarily hoping for.
There's not, yeah, that's true. There's not perfect representation in this. It was making me think of when we were talking about Nanette and about the idea of the mirror of art, you know, and how flat you can get that mirror. And I think there's a lot of warped stuff, like you were saying about how Cassie is textually black, but not necessarily coded black. She is just, you know, an American girl, which really is like a white girl, you know. She's black on the page and on the cover, which is like, better than nothing, but is definitely not great representation in the way that the discourse goes on now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was like pretty typical 90s liberalism of like post-historical, post-racial, it's post-communism. So like we're just human beings, guys. Like, you know, and Martin Luther King happened, and we know it's not perfect. We know that Rodney King happened, and there's a long way to go. But the way we're going to get there is by acknowledging that we're all the same, that we're all white inside, you know, that we're all straight. So, and that was not the way it turned out. But I did get it like a interesting resonance with the modern discourse in this book, because on the page, Cassie is black and Aftran is in the body of this white girl who is very, very rich. Like the reason that Aftran is in this body is because it is the child of like a millionaire.
I think it's like a president of a bank or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right. So he's like an important financial person, and this is a way for them to keep tabs on him and get closer. Maybe they're going to flip him too. And so, her name is literally, Karen, which, you know, they could not have known the way that Karen would be used nowadays. But on the face of it, you know, when they're in the forest at first, I was like, this is kind of interesting because Karen is accusing Cassie just on a surface level. You don't know, if you don't understand the backstory of everything, because I just kind of read this book without understanding Animorphs. You have a white rich girl telling a black girl, you're dangerous. And like, you are a violent, terrible person who wants to kill people constantly because she believes she's an Andalite disguised as a human. And so like, just show me how violent you are so that I can pull my gun out and kill you. And like, this is the white discourse to black people about, about the rights to their bodies, about, we know what your true nature is, and we are ready, we're just inviting you to come and be yourself so that we are justified in gunning you down, literally. That is the situation that the first act is playing out, like on its surface level. And I thought it was just super interesting, the optics of it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And also, so some Animorphs fans have accused Book 19 of being racist because it involves a black girl extending this radical empathy toward a slaveholder. Because that's what Aftran is. She is a slaver. She's enslaving this girl. And I really feel that it's the opposite. Or I'm not black. I'm Latina. I don't want to step out of my lane. But to me, or my experience of reading essays and fiction by black people is that they tend to actually show more empathy towards slaveholders than anyone else. Empathy in the sense of trying to understand their perspective. Like, if you read something like Kindred by Octavia Butler, like, she very much tries to show slaveholders as full human beings. And tries to understand their perspective. That's something I can really understand. I mean, like, I'm also Jewish, and, like, I think I've spent way more time thinking about the humanity and personhood of Nazis than most people have. So to me, the fact that we have this black girl extending empathy toward and trying to understand why a slaveholder does what she does is actually really kind of resonant and interesting, even if it's not what Apple Grant intended, necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that empathy does come from what we've known about Cassie's character up until this point. So it's not like it comes out of nowhere, right? Like, both of her parents are vets. She has an animal rescue organization, like, housed on the farm where she lives. Her whole, life is devoted to taking care of animals and rehabilitating them and, like, really empathizing with all kinds of creatures. So it makes sense that that's what she would do in the situation with the alien, even taking the racial aspect out of it. Although I like what you're saying about how leaving the racial aspect in makes it even more meaningful.
No, I think that's really good how you're, like, putting the focus on like non-human animals, right? I think that's how I think that's how Cassie sees it. We're all these embodied biological creatures, and that the animals and the aliens, there's no difference, right? And then there's humans, and the books really support that in the way that they can become different embodied biological creatures. And I think this is super interesting aspect of the whole thing, and is something that I was like, oh, of course a woman wrote this, about how that is not like a modality, like a John Lockean to talk philosophy of just, like, kind of banking your mind here and there. There's, like, a real embodiment to it, that when you become a different creature, when you morph, there is, like, a mind to that creature that you reckon with and have to wrestle, and it changes you and sticks with you too. And even for the Yeerks, there's a duality of mind that we find out about in this story with Karen and Aftran, that they can communicate with each other, that they are enmeshed emotionally while they are still distinct. And so, like, that is not, it's not a mind-body duality. Your body and your mind are deeply connected, and changing your body changes your mind.
Yeah. I love how whenever they acquire a new morph for the first time, it takes them a while to get control of the mind and like get oriented inside of it, and how prey animals and predator animals have these like very different instincts. Like prey animals are really driven by fear, and it takes a lot of effort for them to kind of like control the fear. I guess like when Rachel becomes a shrew,
Yeah.
she's so disturbed afterwards because of how she was just like so fixated on like seeking out dead bodies and like eating the insects on them. And that like it sticks with her so long after she's done with that morph.
Well, and it's also really interesting because they can morph sentient species as well. So, I mean, Axe, of course, has to morph a human on the regular, and when you read his books, you see his perspective on what it's like to morph a human, and the human body becomes just another animal whose instincts he's trying to deal with. And it's pretty challenging for him at times, right? And then the other Animorphs morph other sentient species as well, and they have it kind of displaces, in a way, what it means to be human or what it means to be any of these sentient species when it becomes just another morph, right? And to some extent for Tobias as well, because of his estrangement from his human body. Like when Axe becomes a human, he becomes like overwhelmed by the sense of taste.
Yeah.
And wanting to try food, because Andalites eat like just basically just passively absorb grass with their hooves. So they don't have any.
Which is so smart. I love that.
Me too. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
But then he's like so into Cinnabon.
And how that's like the one thing that is like threatens to give him away every time he's in human morph is his like completely unreasonable reaction to food, and like how much he eats and how like socially inappropriate he is. Just like okay, book 8, the first Axe book, was by far my favorite of all of the ones that I read for this podcast. And I love when he goes to the movie theater and he's just like crawling on the floor, like picking up food off the floor and like stealing food from people's hands. And like, oh, it's so good.
He discovers chocolate. Yeah.
Oh gosh, Axe. But it's great because it just helps you think again about humans just being another animal. Because for Axe, it just is another animal morph that he's trying to cope with, right?
Right.
And that's kind of a good lead-in to one of the other things that you and I talked about, and that's the idea of Animorphs as kind of like a series of first contact stories, and how I guess the first one is the humans and the Andalites, and then the humans and the Yeerks in the Departure.
So actually, the humans and the Hork-Bajir happens before the humans and the Yeerks. So in book 8, so like book 4 is kind of the first contact between the Animorphs and Andalites, because they find Axe in that book, right? And so then you learn more about Andalites over the course of the next several books and what they're like. And then in book 13, the Animorphs meet some free Hork-Bajir. So that's one of the slave species of the Yeerks, Hork-Bajir, who are like these like really enormous bladed lizard-like things. They're totally covered in blades, and they're like basically shock troops to the Yeerks. And the Animorphs meet some free ones for the first time in book 13. And it turns out that the Hork-Bajir are covered in blades because they're bark eaters. Like they live in trees and they use the blades to carve bark off of trees and eat it. And the Yeerks have basically turned their bodies into weapons, but that's not what they actually use their own blades for. The Animorphs get a whole new perspective on the Hork-Bajir by actually meeting some free ones, and they continue to hang out with these free Hork-Bajir throughout the series. So that first contact story is another one. And then, in book 19 is basically this kind of real first contact between humans and Yeerks. And then later in the series, you get a sort of first contact between humans and taxons in book 43, which is like the taxons are another one of the species, the slave species of the Yeerks, and they're basically like enormous centipedes. Again, with most of these first contacts, like these are species that the Animorphs find very scary before they meet them. Like before they actually meet some free Hork-Bajir, they're terrifying to the Animorphs. Before Cassie actually gets to know Aftran, the Yeerks are terrifying to her. And then before the Animorphs get to know the taxons, they're just these giant, scary, cannibalistic centipedes. And then they actually get to know some taxons a little bit. and they get a new perspective on them. So, yeah, there's kind of a series of different first contacts that occur throughout the series.
Yeah, and I think it's just so cool that, like, First Contact is such a fundamental sci-fi trope. Animorphs brings that into kids lit and does it in such an interesting and varied way. Like, the same experience happens 4 different times in 4 very different ways.
Yes, and it also is very subversive to me because of the fact that, like I said, each of these species appeals instinctively to humans to different degrees. So the Andalites happen first, and the Andalites are kind of more charismatic to human sensibilities. Like, they have fur, they have eyes. Some of the humans, namely Cassie, Rachel, and Margot, the ones attracted to men, describe Axe as cute in his natural form, right? Andalites are clearly just viscerally appealing to humans on some level. But then the Hork-Bajir are not, because they're frightening to humans. But then you get to know them, and that perception turns out to be wrong, right? And then the Yeerks are very much not charismatically appealing to humans, they're parasites, right? But then when Cassie gets to know Aftran, they become friends, and Aftran comes back in a later book and, continues to be important to Cassie. And then, when they get to know the taxons are cannibalistic centipedes, which obviously is not very appealing to human sensibilities, and yet when the Animorphs actually get to know them and their situation a little bit more, then they become more sympathetic. And so it's, because basically what's going on with the taxons is that they have an uncontrollable hunger, and they basically are just, driven by constant screaming hunger, and they kind of can't stop themselves from being cannibals, more or less. They also become more sympathetic. So there's this really great deconstruction that happens both via the morphs and via the first contacts, where, Applegate kind of play with the reader's expectations, where they know which ones you're going to find disgusting instinctually, which ones you're not, and they play on that. And they say, was your first instinct to find this disgusting or awful correct? Was this wrong of you to think of them this way?
Yeah, and I think that mirrors the experience that a lot of people have as they grow up too, because they hear about all of these different species, or experience them in some kind of peripheral sense before getting to know them better, right? Like, they have battles with Hork-Bajir before they find the free ones.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that happens with kids too, where you will hear about, I can remember, I'll just make it personal. I was raised in a very evangelical, white straight home, and very strict, parents. And I can remember going out into the world and becoming an adult, and 9/11 happened, and trying to learn more about Muslim culture and Islam and the history of all that stuff, and seeing pictures of Iran and Iraq in the early 1970s, late 1960s, and going wait a minute, they're just like us.
Yeah.
I don't understand. That's not the scary. Why don't they all have rocket launchers? I thought they just had those. They don't they live in tents? They have houses. What's going on? And I'm kind of making myself sound like an idiot, but I was, but also this was the picture that was painted for me, that because that's easier to hate someone like that, right? Because it's easier to create this monster, and then you can do anything that you need to the monster to survive. And, that's one of the effects of imperialism and war. And these kids experience these others, capital O others, and find out it's more complicated than that. It's never that simple. The enemy is always a person who has a perspective and a reason and is a whole thing.
And then also the Andalites, who appeal to our senses, are actually these terrible imperialists who in the end tried to nuke the entire Earth.
And how it was there from the beginning, even in their embodiment, they have a weapon as part of their body that is a fundamental part of who they are in these stingers.
Well, and not even in the weapon as a part of their body, but the super militaristic culture.
Yeah.
And as soon as, I mean, because I didn't know the ending of the series until Poetry just told us on the podcast today. But it really is made me think back about what we learned about Andalite culture when they met Axe, and like through Axe's perspective, and yeah, like the way that he keeps secrets and all of that, like it was totally foreshadowed from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. A funny story about the aliens of Animorphs. That's an aspect of Animorphs I love. Is I think the aliens are really well done and are very interesting. And what's very funny is I have read in Applegate has done and Grant have done some Reddit AMAs and talked about some of their process and stuff. And they've mentioned that they originally wrote the Andalites just as Greys, like Roswell Greys at the beginning. And then Scholastic said, like, oh, we need you to juice it up, make them more interesting. And so then Applegate and Grant were just like, oh, you want interesting, huh? You want interesting? Get a load of this.
Oh my god.
And then they went on to make aliens that were so complicated that they couldn't make a proper TV show when they attempted it, because the aliens were way too weird.
Yeah. Oh my god.
It's such a power move.
Was the TV show, are they like CGI? Because like I imagine
they're practical puppets and they're horrible.
Oh my god, I was about to say there's no way you could do an Andalite with prosthetics or whatever, but I guess they tried anyway.
They tried and it's a nightmare. Don't watch it.
Oh. That's so sad, because I feel like, I mean, you could, if you went the 100% CGI route, or like combination CGI with motion capture, like Andy Serkis Gollum style, like I feel like you could do a decent job of that today, but maybe not when the TV show was first made. So I do just have one tiny rant that I have to make before we end the show. My least favorite part of the series is how literally every single Animorph hates math. And I was just like so annoyed by all the math hatred as someone who really likes math and thinks that math doesn't get enough credit, or it's just like I just wish, like, just have at least one of them actually like math. I feel like we're sending bad messages to people, or to kids, like maybe if we didn't tell kids all the time that math is hard and boring and they should hate it, maybe they wouldn't hate it as much. So that was, I know it's like such a small detail, but every time one of them would make a joke about how horrible math was, I was just like, seething on the inside.
This is the endless fight, right, between STEM and the humanities, of like, we will always mythologize how we hate STEM, and STEM will be like, well, we'll just never pay you people. And like that is, that's, I guess, the way it is.
That makes me think that like maybe what's happening there is just that Apple Grant hate math, and that was like their personal feelings seeping in to the text.
I would think so.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of at the end of our conversation. So Poetry will give you a chance to just kind of give one last spiel about how Animorphs has impacted you. Like, what are your overall thoughts on it? Is there anything else that you want to tell people before we wrap this up?
I mean, gosh, it's hard to overstate how much Animorphs has impacted my life. I mean, politically, it really solidified my anti-war and anti-imperialist politics at a young age. Not my only influence in that direction by any means, but certainly an important one. I mean, the book series, finished up in 2001, and then 9/11 happened, and there was this drumbeat of war, and I had read this book series all about how war was terrible. And, it inspired me to become a scientist, because the author's dedication to trying to depict, the real biology of animals in the series, and in trying to show their perspective and the research that clearly went into it, made me really interested in doing research as well. It has really created my taste in sci-fi. To this day, I tend to love really dark stories. I tend to like stories with a lot of angst. I like complex world building. I like truly alien aliens, and I really like strong ensemble dynamics, which is all stuff that I picked up from the Animorph series. And then, of course, it inspired me to write this Animorphs fanfic series, Demorphing, which I've been working on for 10 years and is over 600,000 words long, which is like, I mean, it's a hell of an undertaking for anybody to do, to write something that long and have it be a coherent story. And Animorphs is what inspired me to do it and to keep working on it. Like I said, I was just working on it yesterday. So yeah, it's had a huge impact on my life.
And so I'm curious, what has been your experience recommending it to other people?
I'm like an Animorphs evangelist. I'm constantly flinging links to the ebooks at people. To be clear, I do believe in the authors getting paid, but most of the books are not available in print at the moment. So I do give people links to pirated ebooks, but I also encourage them to buy the audiobooks that are available. So I'm constantly, getting people to read the ebooks and linking them. And I no longer I used to have all of the Animorphs books. I don't have them because I gave them all away to my cousins, because I was just getting them all to read it. And I think I've personally been responsible for a lot of people reading Animorphs as adults who didn't read them growing up. So I've gone around bringing the good word of Animorphs to many people.
Yeah, well, it certainly worked for me. I genuinely, I mean, I have a lot of intentions to read a lot of books, but I feel motivated and interested in actually reading through the whole series now that I did like the first 8 books and then 19, because yeah, I really like the characters and they're just like really fun to read. My favorite books of the ones that I read were the last 3 that I read before skipping ahead to the departure. I think the first 5 had like somewhat similar structures, but once you get to number 6, they really start breaking that down and like changing them in really interesting ways. So like in number 6, Jake gets yerked and they have to deal with that. In number 7, they get visited by an alien god and then they have to like make this huge decision about whether to let themselves get rescued or not, because being rescued means abandoning the rest of the human race. And all of this is like mirroring, this dilemma that Rachel is having about having to decide whether to move away with her divorced dad. Number 8 is our first Axe point of view book, and it's just absolutely hilarious, like fish out of water comedy. For listeners who are feeling intrigued and interested in starting, definitely start the series, and I would say get to book 8, and I think at that point you'll kind of know whether or not it's for you or not. And as I was reading, it was, really reminding me of some of my other favorite series in a lot of ways. Like, it has a lot of connections to His Dark Materials, which Alan and I have another podcast about because of that whole, first contact sentient alien thing. Not to mention, the like close relationships between humans and animals and children getting involved in war and all of that. It also reminded me a lot of Buffy. I don't think I feel quite as strongly about Buffy as you do about Animorphs, but that's like the closest that I get. I love the like kids fighting evil after school while also like struggling with what that means, the impact it has on them, like also trying to just like live their normal lives in other ways. I'm super glad that we invited you on and that I had the chance to really get to know this series that I think I didn't give enough credit to when I was 8 years old, but I'll cut myself some slack.
Yeah, it reminded me when you were talking about how like around 9/11, when that's when the series came to a close, that all of the work that Applegate did kind of came into sharp relief, I think is like part of a larger trend that I saw in the 90s in the stuff that I read, and even things that were like popular in the culture at the time, like the X-Files. We had constructed in the West this entire kind of authority state where we had given them a lot of power because there was like this, existential dread about, nuclear war with the USSR. And then like all the police actions that we did to combat that after the USSR collapsed, like we said, okay, so now we're going to get rid of the NSA, right? We're going to reveal like everything that the CIA did to fight this war, and we're going to have truth and reconciliation. And they were like, no. What are you talking about? We're not doing that. They're like, well, let's close the military bases around the world and stuff, right? We don't need, no. And I think a lot of artists were like turned on all of that stuff and said, this feels like we live in a war state now. And they're just waiting for the next war so that things can get back to normal, the way that they've been since World War II, so that they have every excuse to like exert their authority around the world, but also on us. And that a lot of science fiction authors wrote stuff like this, where the Yeerks are engineering a world war. That's like their plan to like soften up humanity. Because they don't need all of us for hosts. They just need enough of us to survive for them to get what they want out of us. And they don't, want to fight a big battle. So why not let us kill each other off? And then they can just get out of us what they need. Like, that's a very dark plan. But I think as soon as 9/11 happened, like, you see the effect of that. And I just wonder how many kids grew up reading Animorphs and got shipped overseas to the Middle East, and then now live with PTSD, live with disability from the war, or aren't living at all, and it's like, it's heartbreaking. And I think this is what good art does. It, like, especially good science fiction, it looks right into the immediate future and tells us something about ourselves and tries to warn us. So I think it's very much worth talking about. It's very much worth reading. If, people in the audience have listened to this and haven't read it, I think you should look into it. It's more sophisticated than you would expect. And it's got cool onomatopoeia sounds in it too. So
yeah. Let's all try one. Wait, we should all do a seer. like the hawk, like, seer! That's my best seer.
It's like, ah! Like that. That's like what they sound like.
There you
go.
What was that?
That was supposed to be a horse.
I
don't know. I was never a horse girl. Okay, so join us next month. We're gonna do an episode on Tokyo Pet Shop of Horrors, which is a late 90s Japanese horror manga by writer and artist Matsuri Akino. And we're gonna have a special guest, Stitchomancery. They are a fandom participant, commentator, and critic who recently has been writing a column on fandom for Teen Vogue. So definitely tune in for that. It's going to be great.
It's a little bit like Twilight Zone, sort of, or like an anthology, although there's like the stories string together. But it's interesting. It has an interesting structure to it. I've read a lot of Japanese manga horror, and it's not nearly as graphic and bloody as I was expecting. It's more
psychological horror, I think.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So I was like surprised by that.
This is the first manga that I've ever read, and I really enjoyed it. It definitely has a vibe of like, be careful what you wish for, I think.
Right.
Some of
the
stories,
that's why I mean Twilight Zone, yeah.
Yeah, because like in each story, there's one client or customer who like gets a pet from the store, and it is either like exactly what they need in kind of a fucked up way, or exactly what they want, which is the opposite of what they need.
Right.
And it's just it's a really interesting way of looking at like, desire and wishes and like, or just like how fucked up the world is in general, and like how to kind of solve that in a dark, twisted, magical way. Okay, so don't forget to rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts. It's been a while since we've had a haiku, but if you leave us a review, we will write a poem for you specifically and read it on our show. Poetry, where can people find you on the internet?
On Tumblr, you can find me at FeatherQuillPen, and you can find me and my epic works of Animorphs fanfiction on Archive of Our Own at Poetry. I was an early adopter with AO3.
Oh yeah, 6-letter name. That's good on you.
Poetry, no numbers, just poetry.
And I'm Anya, and you can follow me on Twitter at StrangelyLiteral. That's strangely, then LITERL.
I'm Alan. You can follow the show on Twitter at HGStorycast and visit our website at hgstorycast.com.
If you'd like to leave us feedback, you can visit hgstorycast.com/contact or send an email to contact@hallowedgroundmedia.com. Hallowed Ground Storycast is a Hallowed Ground media production and is produced under a Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike license.